Hello and welcome back to Season 14 of Prophetic Voices, Preaching and Teaching Beloved Community, a podcast from the Episcopal Church's Division of Mission Program, where we explore the season and the lectionary through the lens of social justice. I'm your host, Reverend Shaniqua, Interim Indigenous Missioner, and I'm so glad you could join us. In this episode of Prophetic Voices, we'll be discussing the Christmas lectionary for Liturgical Year A. Our exceptional guests this week are the Reverend Dr. Christina O'Hara, who is the Spiritual Director and the Rector at Episcopal Church of the Good Shepherd in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She enjoys hiking, ballet, tap dance, and cuddling her two new grandbabies. The Reverend Canon Dr. Altagracia Perez-Bullard, who is a queer, Black, urban Latina who now works and lives at Virginia Theological Seminary. After 40 years of congregational ministry, both lay and ordained, she is the Associate Dean of Multicultural Ministries and Assistant Professor of Practical Theology. She feels deeply challenged to do all that she can to support the thriving of creation and is discerning what that looks like at this point in her life. And last but not least, the biblical Aaron Scott, he, him, who serves as the Gender Justice Officer for the Episcopal Church, supporting LGBTQ+ and gender justice ministries churchwide. Aaron is a layperson in the Diocese of Olympia, a dad, an author, and loves pumpkin spice flannel and all things basic and fall. Welcome, friends. Thank you all so much for being willing to be guests on the podcast as we discuss Christmas. So exciting. What readings do you use for Christmas typically? You have like Luke or John?
Usually Luke for me is just sort of the most familiar, the most traditional. People are expecting that story and all the tongue twister names, Quirinius and all those fun things. I mean, I think that's what people are expecting, the shepherds and the angels, the sort of typical Christmas pageant. So it's that tends to be my go-to.
For me, it's dependent because there have been times when I'm preaching to the same people on Christmas Eve and on Christmas Day. So I'll use I'll use the Luke one for Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day I'll use the John one. Or sometimes the kids have done the Luke one, like that they were the sermon the last Sunday of Advent or something. And then I'll end up doing something with John. I always get lost with John, though. It like invites me into a space where I get too spacey, but I do preach on it.
Luke for sure. The baby is very, very, very important to me. And a lot of people. Mary is very, very important to me. And a lot of other people. And yeah, the shepherds are very important to me. So for sure, Luke.
Makes sense. And especially if we've ever seen the Peanuts Christmas special, right? Then we always remember that's the story that, I can't remember if it was a Linus. Somebody tells that story at the end.
Linus.
So, what liturgical ideas do you have for preaching or celebrate? Well, it's just what liturgical idea do you have for celebrating Christmas this year? And what do we need to keep in mind this Christmas?
I think in a world where so much is changing and in flux, for me, there's some comfort in the traditions of the ways we've always done it. And especially for people who just come to church once or twice a year. I don't want to shake them up too much. I want to shake them up in some good ways, and have them maybe think of the scriptures in some new ways that they hadn't considered before. But as far as like the traditions and the beauty of a Christmas Eve service or a Christmas morning service in an Episcopal church, there's some things that you just expect. You know, the candles at the end, singing Silent Night is something that's pretty traditional, and people come to expect that, and the beauty and the hush and the sort of the mystical moments like that.
My ministry background is actually street ministry and organizing with folks who are unhoused, incarcerated, poor, and so Christmas was the single most difficult and traumatic time of year in our ministry for our congregation. This is before I was the gender justice officer. And because of how the message of Christmas, right, has been so distorted, in the context of empire. And, so we had to, however we did it, whether it was through our service, it was through our blowout Christmas party, which accompanied the service. We just had to dig very deep to like while not shying away from any of the really radical truth of the gospel, right? What it means for this poor family to have this baby in this very harrowing time. Not shy away from the truth of that while still digging as deep as possible into the joy of it. And one year, everybody hated me for this, but I made us do a Christmas pageant one year. But we did it. It was Tent City Jesus, right? So we were organizing a tent city, and so the Christmas pageant took place where instead of a manger, like baby Jesus was born at Tent City, and that was like, it was true. It was what was happening biblically, and it was also what was happening in our community. And so I find like that the deeper I go in the text, like the more connection there is to the struggles that are breaking out all around us, and also finding like even joy amidst all that struggle, and having, like I said, a blowout Christmas party afterwards.
It's awesome.
So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with some of that because in my current context, I'm not in the context that I've been in most of the decades of my life in the church period or as a priest. And so I find myself missing the things that used to be assumed. Like there would be a posada, there would be a party for kids where they would have a piñata. There would be like certain Mexican traditional foods that, though they were not from my childhood, I grew to associate them with Christmas because the communities I served were primarily Mexican or of Mexican descent in some generation. And so I find myself trying to, like, the part that I can recreate is that I would go to midnight mass. And whether that was in my own congregation or when we started joining other people's Christmas Eve so that we wouldn't have like 10 people in every church. We could just all be together in one church. I can still pull that one off, right? Like I could go to any church that has a midnight mass on Christmas Eve. But the other things that all were about like that last week of Advent or even the second week, and the preparing and the getting ready gave a physical and visceral feeling to like Christmas, which since I did give birth to little people, it echoes, right? It's that whole like nesting and trying to get things ready and, oh my God, this baby's going to come here any day. We don't have a thing. And, so I miss that. I mean, it actually gives me goosebumps as I talk about it because I miss it because I've not been in that context now for 6 years. And so if I were doing Christmas, that's what I would be doing this year if I were leading a congregation.
I think sometimes, at least I've noticed, like our congregations don't like to drive at night. And so they want to do the midnight mass at like 5 p.m. or something. And I'm like, really? Really? A 4? Wow. I'm like, at least has to be dark. The sun has to have been set. I'm like, what? But anyway.
Yeah, we were doing 7. That was our compromise.
Okay.
But the kids' service was at 5 because those families had a lot of things to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. Let's talk about Luke. What do you think folks most misunderstand about the story? What do you think maybe we need to focus, or not focus on, but explain more?
My youth group kids called this the ruining Christmas story because we would quote from Ken Bailey in his book, Jesus with Middle Eastern Eyes. And he talks about, he grew up in the Middle East as a child of a minister there, and talks about how in the Middle Eastern context, there would be the highest values for hospitality. And so the picture that we get of Mary and Joseph, like being in a barn, he says, is hogwash, that they would have been welcomed into the family. They would have been known by the families in Bethlehem because Joseph was of that family and lineage. And that when the reason we know that Jesus was laid in the middle of the the living room is because he was laid in the manger, and that's where the manger was. It wasn't outside the barn. It wasn't in a cave. It was right on the edge of the family living space and the lower level of the house where they would let the animals in at night to keep the animals safe and warm, and also to warm up the family living space. And so this idea of welcoming Jesus into the middle of the family unit, surrounded by community, surrounded by love, and that's what God does for us, welcoming us into that family space. And so that, when I first heard it, blew my mind, literally, figuratively. And the idea of having Jesus not far away, but in the center, and that God welcomes us into that central place where we have belonging, where we have community, where we have love surrounding us, and that we welcome Jesus into that space in welcoming the other. Those people who might be outside in the cold, we welcome them into that central family space. So that for me is what has been sort of a transformational story for me of what I thought I knew about the Christmas story, the Hallmark version of the Christmas story, and a story even better. One of my preaching professors said, if you're going to take away a precious thing from someone in the story they thought they knew, you have to give them something better. And so for me, that story of Jesus in the center of the family room is that something better.
That is lovely. The way you describe it, it's lovelier than the way I've heard it before. I do feel like you gave me something. But for me, it was funny because even rereading the readings for today's conversation, I was struck by the everydayness of all the people. Like they were just minding their own business. They were just living their lives. They were just doing the things, and the shepherds were shepherding, and, everybody was just doing what they would be doing when this thing interrupts their whole world. And I can't, the family on a pilgrimage, or even the family, trying to do the census, trying to it's all the things that we do as people who live in countries where numbers get taken and things, and that, that they were faithful in going to get counted, and how important getting counted is. I've participated in census campaigns just because, as Black, Indigenous people of color really have to get counted. Because if we're not counted, all of the resources of the kingdom, now that we have a king, all of the resources of the kingdom, having spent some time at a No King rally, but all of the resources get designated. All the power gets distributed based on these numbers, and that our people are afraid to get counted. They don't trust the government counting them. And so, but that they're, here's this family quite not right, clearly a family, but not according to the rules, right? Because they're still engaged. How are you about to have a baby? The kinds of questions that people in my community ask one another sometimes. What do you mean you're pregnant? You're still living at home with your parents. You're not supposed to be doing that. So I like that. I like being able to try to make them flesh and blood, so that baby Jesus is flesh and blood, and that we remember that every baby that's born is like this miracle and this shining light in this world of possibilities, and not make Jesus Jesus is special. We love baby Jesus, but that baby Jesus makes all of us, right? Children of God. And so all the babies are special and need to be cared for and comforted and taken care of and all those things. That's what struck me the most when I read it this time. Dang, they were just living their lives.
I feel like both of what each of you just said is what's really central for me. Both understanding Jesus as not a one-off, but and not cast away from this community, very much at the heart, the beating heart of this community and family, and a massive disruption. I think for me, the undersell here is what a massive disruption this is to the powers and principalities of this order. And it's because it's not random the family that Jesus is born into, the mother that Jesus is born to, the community that Jesus is born to. It's very explicitly God choosing to enter the world from the bottom, from people who are under the boot of oppression. It reminds me of this article I read some years back. There was an Israeli archaeologist who was Yardena Alexander, who was part of this excavation of a site near where people now believe, and which is worshipped as the site of the Annunciation. And so the family home of Mary, right? And what they're excavating were these huge pits of oil, crops, grain that people were hiding from the Roman Empire, that farmers were growing and then basically practicing mass tax evasion because they needed to live and feed their families. And they could not give the empire what the empire was demanding of them, and they would not. So they organized and they hid these pits. And guess whose house was like at the center of this hive, like the literal queen bee of this underground economy is the site we say the angel came and spoke to Mary and said, guess what, girl? Guess who's going to do this thing? So it's just like none of this is an accident. Actually, Jesus is born not just to hurting people, but hurting people who are going to stand up and say, no, like we will transform the world and the last will be first.
Beautiful.
That's a whole nother layer of like why Mary was chosen, because she was prepared. She was out there, getting things ready and making sure people could survive. Like, okay, we can entrust her with this amazing, gift to the world. She can be trusted.
That's beautiful.
Right, like God is like scanning the map and like, who's ready? Who's actually ready for this? Who's got the bunker?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I love it.
I love thinking of Mary as like the organizing Mary the organizer.
Mary the prepper.
That's the queen bee.
Yeah, and the queen bee. Yeah, that could be a total church name. Mary the organizer. They have Joseph the carpenter as church name, so this is going to be Mary the organizer. Christina, I know you talked about the hospitality. And the story says there's no room for them. And who in our communities is there no room for? And maybe who in our church is there no room for?
Oftentimes, I think we want to be selective, right? And who we choose to be with us. And so I think in our congregation, we've been surprised sometimes at who has found us and how they have found us. And so, a homeless guy got dropped off right on our doorstep, like by an Uber. And he was way far from any of the places where any of the shelters are. And yet then that gave us the opportunity to host him and to make sure he had what he needed. And he needed a wheelchair. And one of our congregations said, I have a shed with an extra wheelchair, and brought it to church. And he needed a bus pass to the next town to get to where his family was. And we were able to pull together enough money to get him to where he needed to go. And so I think sometimes, to have that person who's maybe not the person that you would have expected to come to church on Sunday. He smelled a little, his clothes needed to be washed. And he needed a place to stay and then a place to get on to the next place. And so it really tested our mettle, I think, that day to say, are we going to be hospitable to everyone who God brings us and see this person as Jesus in his distressing disguise, as Mother Teresa talked about those people that she would meet on the streets of Calcutta. And I think we treated him like we wanted to treat Jesus. And it took some work of the Spirit, I think, for us to see him as Jesus and to treat him as Jesus. And ideally, we would welcome that stranger instead of pushing them out. And I was pleased that day. I think we passed the test that day. Not all days, but that day I think we passed the test.
I think it's weird that I feel like sometimes in our churches, because of the image that we have of what it means to be praying or at peace or whatever, anything that disrupts our little bubble and our image is so there's like the obvious people that are like excluded, whether it's, because of our notions of sin or because our class issues or whatever. But even like families with children,
right?
Like they get pushed out of the center, like the thought of Jesus being in the center of the family. And what we try to do with children and families, always putting them on the side because they're too noisy, because they're like, and it's like, whenever I've preached and children make noise, I love it. I mean, it's just so, first of all, I prefer children to adults. So I need to say that first, because that's in fairness. I know other people don't feel that way. But it's like, I feel like they hear my voice booming and their immediate thought is to respond. And I think they're laughing and playing and doing all sorts of things that ground what it is that we think we're doing when we're together as, in a sacred moment. And it just makes me sad that we, that's why I often say that we don't really want children or new people.
Right.
We just want their money so we can keep doing what we've been doing the way we've been doing it.
Right.
But, because they disrupt, they disrupt. I just feel like God is all about disruption. And I think when we think that God is about mellowing us out in a way that is like, I don't know, delta waves or whatever, like that thing, like when you numb out in front of the TV, that's not what we're meant to be doing. So I feel like we push out even people that it would make sense for us to welcome in. We push them out.
This weekend I preached at a church in Sioux City, and I did this where I was kind of getting all excited, and I was like, who is called? And turn your neighbor, say you're called. And this little boy, I think I asked him later because he was in front of me in the lunch line. He's 8 years old. I didn't know that at the time, but I was like, are you going to answer that call? And I was expecting, and I was going to be like, if you are, raise your hand and say whatever, I'm called or whatever. And I asked that question. He's like, yes, yes. And he just like yelled out, and I was like, that is amazing. And so sometimes sometimes the children are the best, right? And they like
the best.
Yes,
I love that.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome.
And they get it viscerally. They're not so in their heads. They're not managing their image. They're not thinking what's appropriate. They're just responding viscerally to the things that we say that have so much color and texture to them. And we've lost that, right? Because we're so socialized, but they still get it. Like, I love giving communion to little kids too, because they just have all the best, like, they like the little kid that when you gave them the bread and wine, he would always go, and they would go, yes, yes, that's what it's like. That's what it's like to receive that nourishment, that presence.
Yeah.
So no, I think that's, let the children in.
I know. I remember giving the cup to this little girl and saying the blood of Christ, and her eyes got as big as saucers, and she's like, the blood of Christ. Like, she was just like, this is amazing. Yep. Receive me as you receive a little child.
Who in our community?
Wow. I mean, I had a friend recently say to me, he's Jewish and he had attended an Episcopal service, and he's like, are they trying to keep people away? Like, I literally cannot. And he, he's like, he was game. He was ready to be. He's like, I cannot figure out what is going on here. And it was a really good flag for me. There's so many flags though. And I think folks have already spoken. So like, I feel like one of, as beautiful as our liturgy is, we are obsessed with control. We are culturally obsessed controlling how God's going to show up. And like, what illusion is that? Like, we are so allergic to disruption. And I think worship is actually supposed to be a place where we're preparing ourselves to encounter God in the world. And if we cannot even like let people exist as themselves, whether that's as children, as people who are differently abled, neurodiverse, like as people who, like, when they experience God, heaven forbid, like put their hand in the air or like shout, like, or people who are in desperate need, right? Which is so many people. And I think if we can find even just small ways as congregations to crack ourselves open a little, to like pry the prayer book out of our frigid cold fingers a little bit, it would spiritually strengthen us, and it would spiritually help a lot of what we're called to do in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think Luke tells the story of the shepherds? And who are the shepherds of today? And maybe what does their inclusion say about who God entrusts with good news?
So what I thought about the shepherds, and I think the thing that struck me about them was that, so they have this moment of realization and they realize that God is doing something, and then they're like game. They're like, let's run and go see what it is, this thing that we were told that God is doing. And then they went and saw, and then they immediately told people about their experience, their own spirit, that own moment of like glorious experience, and that they spread the word everywhere. So I thought, look at the shepherds being evangelists. And I think today, what it reminded me of is that God is doing things in the world, and that one of the things that we as folks who are busy over here doing our own lives, even those who are taking care of their little flocks, need to go to where God is doing the thing and witness it and then testify about it. Because the good news that God is doing through all sorts of people everywhere is not what's being picked up in the media. It's not even what's making social media, because we're so like only the sensational. And so I think that the crazy things, the organizing that's going on, the creating of communities, creating of homes, the people that are working to change some of the ways that people are being crushed, whether it's because of policies, politics, or the way, business as usual, right? The economy and things. I think that we need to be out there seeing what God is doing in the midst of that and sharing that. That it's not like it's some sacred moment over here, but that God really is out there, and that we can witness and then testify. Like that's what they did. They went to check it out, and then they told them about their experience that brought them there. So they shared how God spoke to them, but then they also shared what was happening with everyone else. And wow, if we just followed the shepherds, that would be good.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, they were sort of a lower strata of society. They were not the educated people. They were not the religious people per se. They're living out on the fringes in the fields, with the dirty animals, doing a dangerous profession, having to protect the animals from any predators or people who are trying to steal the animals. But yet they understand something about what's happening, maybe on a deeper level, whether it's because they're so connected to nature and to the environment, because they live in it all the time, that they're the ones who are out in the fields when the angels show up, because they're there. So I think we can just sort of see their availability, and sometimes the availability of those who are sort of on what we would say maybe the bottom rung of society, is maybe an openness to hear and then respond in a way that someone who's very concerned with their own prestige or control aren't going to see. And so it's a beautiful message of the gospel being open and available to anyone who has eyes to see, and then giving us that joy in it and the opportunity to pass it along. It is out of control, like you were saying, Aaron.
I do. I really feel like the shepherds are the flip side of that control. Like there's people in a very unequal society like the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus' birth, right, who are desperate to maintain control and maintain their grip on things. And then there's everybody else who's desperate for disruption because they cannot live going along with this. And I think the shepherds are exactly who that is. When I think there's so many people you could swap today, right? In this country alone, there's like 140 million people who cannot afford a $400 emergency, right? Who are already either not making it or they're just like one car repair away from total financial ruin. Like that's folks desperate actually for something to change massively. And I think that's always where God shows up first, because people are looking for that kind of disruption that says, actually, everybody has dignity. Everybody, starting with you.
Absolutely.
So I think all of you are parents. Maybe currently you don't have children living with you, but what would you do if you had just had a baby and were visited by like maybe some migrant farm workers or something who told you your baby was the Messiah or was a sign of the Messiah?
Because of the people I hang out with, weird things like this happened to me. So when I was pregnant with my last baby, which was a long time ago, that last baby is 29 years old. I was somewhere. I don't know. I walked into a store. I can't remember what kind of store. And a woman, said, "Oh, how beautiful that, you're pregnant," whatever things that people say when you're pregnant. And then she said, your child is going to be great. Your child is going to cause such disruption in the world. Your child is going to bring new things and be amazing. And I was like, that had already happened like at least one or two other times where I was like, oh my gosh, this baby, who am I? Like, what is going to happen with this baby? And it did. The feeling was protective. I got into a car accident while I had this baby, and some other physically violent things happened while I was pregnant with this baby. And I just kept saying, that's the enemy trying to stop this baby from coming into the world. And so this was my youngest, Santana, who, if anybody's ever met them, is like a pistol. You know how we used to say a pistol? And I think it's true of all of our children that they are, if we don't squash them, they are amazing, and they bring awareness and that whole like out of the mouth of babes thing. I just think so. I don't know. So I actually have had that experience, and it made me extremely protective. It made me feel like I had to take care. I had to be so careful because if that was true, these things that people said to me randomly, and my child was at risk. Okay. And I can't help but wonder that Mary did not feel the same way, She's over there pondering things and tucking them away in her heart.
Yeah. Like, what a confirmation for her of all of her hopes and dreams, in a sense, for this child, because she'd already been told that this child would be great and would be the sort of the one who would turn the world topsy-turvy, and then to have it be confirmed by these strangers whom she'd never met, and they're saying the same thing about the greatness of this child. I think every parent thinks that their kid is great, that their kid is the most exceptional. But to have...
Until they're teenagers, we really do think that. I'm just kidding. I love teenagers.
But then to have that confirmed by these strangers who they'd never met. I mean, for you to have a stranger, come up to you and say that. We had a similar experience with our first child. We were at a party, and my husband was out walking with her in the street, and a Spanish-speaking Pentecostal church just let out from worship. And they asked my husband if they could pray for our daughter. And so they start praying in Spanish. for her blessing, and that she would be great and she would be, speaking the word of God, not realizing my husband and I actually speak Spanish. And so he understood all the things that they were blessing her with and agreeing with it, because we're also people of faith. And so they thought they were being very sneaky. But yet, to have that confirmation from a stranger that you've never met, that this child will be for the turning of the world the right way around, and that is an amazing thing. Like, okay, we're in this together. And we're connected to a God who wants the good of our children, and that good for our children will not be just for our children, but for the blessing of the whole world. And that is a beautiful thing. So thanks for reminding me of that story, Altagracia.
Yeah. It's precious.
It is.
So in the story, it says, the angels proclaim peace to all. How can we reclaim peace, not as a passive quiet, but as like a justice-filled reality?
That's a really good question.
And I think there's another tension there in that comment about the Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in our heart. How might contemplation and action, right, be our faithful response to incarnation? So,
yeah, well, that idea of peace, the word for peace in Hebrew, shalom, is not just an absence of conflict. It is wholeness. It is justice. It is the world operating in the ways that God as creator intended from the beginning, that there would be goodness and righteousness and love and access for all to the goodness of God and everything the world has to offer. So to see that peace as not just, oh, I'm feeling peaceful, but I'm being transformed and being healed and made whole so that I can be an agent of healing and wholeness and transformation in this world, that it's not supposed to stop with me. It's supposed to spread throughout the whole world, that transforming peace, that revolutionary kind of peace that transforms everything it touches. So that's, I think, the beauty of that Prince of Peace.
I love that. And I think some of the hope that our faith assumes or tries to give us or is grounded in also speaks to being able to trust that given what's going on in the world, that doesn't have the last word. That sense of people, a lot of our communities understand that kind of we live in more than one world, that there's like the world out there where people are, power hungry, consuming, hurting, and that God offers us a different world, a different way to be in the world. And that means, not that it's not equanimity all the time, but that does mean like that there can be like a place of tranquility that we can embody, trusting in God while everything around us is crazy and hectic. And for me, that's sometimes only for moments, but those moments then give me the energy and the capacity to keep going. And that's where I put the contemplation thing too. It's like, I'm not meditating so that everything will just, I don't know, maybe there'd be something good about everything just flowing over me. That's not my personality, but it is at all. But it is like to be able to be reminded that there is a place where I dwell with God, a place where we dwell with God, a life that we're living in God, that in the face of everything else, we can have some tranquility and some peace. And that gives us like, the resources that we need. It gives us, the capacity to keep responding, with acts of justice and acts of mercy and acts of compassion, and to fight for justice and for a world that doesn't have to be so dog-eat-dog, that it could be a compassionate world. But in order to have the reserve to do that, we need to remember that all the energy and all the stuff doesn't just come from us. And that's that piece that, I just have to do my shift. I just have to do what God puts before me, and God is doing the work, and that gives me peace. Even when things look really bad. I mean, things look really bad right now for a lot of families. People are really in an extreme, exaggerated, out loud way all over the world. And so that would be the piece, is like, I can keep working because I'm going to work for justice, knowing that God is working through me and many, many other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sometimes it feels like we can only just do so little, right? We can do a little bit of good, but maybe God multiplies that little bit of good into something earth-shattering that would transform systems and governments, and but that's beyond what we can imagine. So we just do our little bit of our mustard seed of faith, plant our little bit of seed, and hope that God might increase that to do something huge and transformative to the world.
Yeah, I mean, my question with peace is always peace for who? Peace for, because I think when you're looking from the top down, we often confuse peace with control, right? That is true in the time of the Roman Empire, right? The Roman peace is really not about peace and health and thriving for the majority of people who were living under that empire. It was about a time of immense inequality and violence, with very, very tight control at the top. And I think of peace as something very active. I don't actually think of it as something passive at all. I do think that in order to get our bearings under us, especially in a moment where we're just being gaslit left and right, and on top of all that actually difficult, damaging, violent things that are happening to us, then being told that that's not real, right? And that we cannot trust our sense of reality. Having a place where you can think is important. Having a place where you can contemplate is important. But I think we have to be very clear about who gets to define peace and who gets the last word on it, right? We don't say peace is here because this government and that government said it. We are looking directly to the people who are being most harmed. We're looking directly to the people like the Holy Family, right? Who were not running the show from the top, to be our leaders on that.
So let me shift us over to John. I always struggle with John. I feel like he's like a slam poet or something, or he was high or something. I don't know. He's I always struggle with John.
John's a poet.
Okay. The incarnation reveals a God who takes on flesh. What does that say about the sacredness of bodies, especially those deemed disposable by society?
I think it's the thing that is the most problematic about our theology, that we think the greatest thing that God ever did was come to us in the form of a person. And yet we don't like bodies. It's so contradictory. It's and we don't take serious. Sometimes I feel like I'm just shocking my students for shock value, and I'm really not. It's the ADHD, as I say. It's I really am just meaning to be come on, y'all, for real. Like when I used to work with gang kids, we would talk about the incarnation. And then I would say something like, yeah, like when Jesus had, well, what I would say to them, I'm not going to say, but because, adults, but, would be like, when Jesus had sexual passion, and they would say, no, not Jesus. And I would be like, but Jesus had a body, and Jesus was an adolescent, and Jesus, all the things that you feel, Jesus felt, all of them, including those feelings. And they just thought I was crazy. But then when they would talk about Jesus, it animated them to have a sense of like, well, if God really understands, because God lived in a body, I feel like it had created a kind of accessibility for them to this God that, it was a gang prevention project. So they were the bad kids. So, but it gave them an access to God that was like, wow, they came from religious homes and they knew the story, but that this also meant that they had power to be the children of God, that God was working in them and through them. It was the kind of radical message that it really is. It was outlandish, but we have just made that so not, like we don't let ourselves think about God incarnate, even though the incarnation is supposed to be our big thing.
Right. We've sanitized it. We totally have, and made it so bland, right? And that, this picture of Jesus meek and mild, which we see in the little baby, but yet, he had power, he had strength, he had charisma, he had all of those feelings that we have, and he valued everybody that he encountered. He touched the leper, he affirmed the woman who was caught in adultery, and he showed them that they mattered, that they had value and purpose, and that God had placed them there for a reason, and that they had a role to play in God's salvation history as well. And so when we sort of say some bodies are more valuable than others or more worthy than others, we want to put ourselves at the top, of course, right? Because I'm pretty special, but yet to see that all of these bodies are created in the image of God. All of these people are precious and worthy and have a role to play in sharing the love of God in the world. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Altagracia. I've shocked some people too in the seminary class that I teach, and I said, that Jesus was a sexual being. And he might, have, however we believe he acted out on that, he certainly lived that out in his body. And so how do we deal with that?
I think when I think about John and how, how wild, comparatively speaking, John is, in terms of the way it sounds, it always helps me to remember that John is coming from people who are like, maybe the people who are feeling like most left out, like most pushed out. And so talks really big in the way that folks who have been pushed out are going to be like, I like double down on I matter. But when you take that and you're like, oh, that's not for the folks at the bottom, that's for the folks at the top, then it becomes incredibly distorted. And so with this question about bodies, it's like, can you imagine those words from John? Do they sound different if you're hearing them read at drag brunch out of the mouths of like performers at drag brunch than from the House of Bishops? And like, not to like shade the House of Bishops whatsoever, but it's like, this is like who the original audience or who the original speaker, let me say, like speaker and audience of this text is much more marginalized. And so claiming that boldness of belonging is very different. And then you think about, thinking about Jesus and the incarnation, like there's the mess of the baby, babies are very messy. We don't like to think of God as that messy and that needy and that dependent on us. But I think like this is a really valuable time for us to get clear that God's not going to do anything for us. God needs us to take care of God and to like nurture God very, very tenderly in this moment by nurturing the power and the leadership of the dispossessed.
So John's Gospel calls Jesus the Word or the Logos. How might our words participate in or resist the divine word today?
I do come from a community that, like, you have to be careful what you say, like that there's a lot of, just in the culture, not the religious people necessarily, though them too, are careful what they say, right? Because you'll call things into being with your words. And I do think that, like, when you said that, I felt in my heart, like, the times that I say how hopeless things are, like how hopeless our social realities are these days, that's me resisting the word of God, right? Because that's not what God says about any of us or any of the situations we create. I'm such a mess. But I do think that in affirming, sometimes I wish for people, even people that I strongly disagree with and that bring out great anger and wrath in me because of what they're doing in the world. Like, I remind myself to say what I want for them, like what I want. I want you to heal. I want you to get right size. I want you to release this obsession that's possessed you, that would make you take what power you've been given for caring for society, and instead you're using it in a destructive way, for the purpose of greed. And I believe that our words have power. And because of this, because of what John says, like, if we're also made children of God, then we also create a reality in a world by what we say, what we wish, what we pray, what we name and don't name. Absolutely. And I think it's really, I'm always conscious, like, when I say certain things, like, what am I calling into being with those words,
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that word logos described as a blueprint. And so Jesus as the blueprint for the world is
I love that.
Is a blueprint of love, right? And we are supposed to participate with that. And those who are working against that blueprint, it's frustrating when we want that blueprint to be acting in love and it is not. And so to be conscious of the way we use our words, to bless and not to curse, and then to bless even those people who might be cursing others, whether with their words or with their actions, to bless them, to wish the best for them, to put the best construction on them. That is hard. That is truly hard. But if we're going to be acting in the blueprint of love in the world, then we are called to a higher standard. And so to be that blessing of even those who are doing harm, not to allow that harm or to okay the harm they're doing, but to pray that somehow even that harm would be turned towards good, the challenge.
I think words are really powerful. I also think that words, we know words have to go with how we live, right? How we treat each other, how we act collectively. And I think that is really important to me in a time of incredible distortion in particular, like to be able to see, like, are the words lining up with the deeds? Are the words lining up with the lived reality? And who is even able to speak right now, and who is willing to speak right now, in addition to act. And when I think about this, I think a lot about what Martin Luther King said about love and power. We all know, right, what happens when you have power without love. It's like a reckless abuse. But when you have love without power, he said, it's sentimental and anemic. And I do worry that we can do that if it's all talk and no walk. Yeah.
So what tips do you have for preaching Christmas Eve or Christmas?
I think there's often a lot of pressure for those of us who are preaching Christmas to make it really good, to make it really memorable, because this may be the one time that this person or this family is in church. And that kind of that kind of anxiety doesn't make me preach very well. So for me to just rest in the power of God's Spirit and trust that God's Spirit will speak, that for me is really important. That helps me to deal a little bit with my anxiety of, this better be good, I better make this work. But that the story belongs to all of us, and to share the story in a way that people can hear something new of the love of God, and to focus on that love of God for all people, that God would incarnate into a human body, showing that value of the body, showing that love for all humanity, from the least to the greatest. And everything in between. That for me is something that I try to focus on, so that I don't freak out before I preach.
I would say to take seriously your own feelings. Like, we do some preparation, we do some studies, we look things up, and whatever it is that we do to prepare. But it's such an emotional time for everyone that I found that people receive well when I'm honest about that. Like, when, I want to create a moment for all of us to just pause, because it's all been, this is especially during Advent, but even at Christmas, like, to pause and think about the depth of what this gift means and what that feels like, to use our feelings so that when we communicate, it feels authentic and it's not just like these words, but also so that people can see themselves and hear themselves and recognize, like, oh, people of faith think these things, that it's not this sanitized, everything is going to be great kind of, image, but that, when I'm brokenhearted, I say that I'm brokenhearted, and then still preach the hope that Christmas means. 'Cause I think that's its power.
I feel like what helps me is just to really remember, like, this is not our show. This is not in both in the sense of, like, this is not like a nice show we're putting on for people to like the opera, or like a play. Like, it's not a show, and it's also not our show. And I think that's very hard for us, because everybody, like you said, like, wants to, like, do it right. It's the biggest day of the year, blah, blah, blah. But, like, leaving room, I think, like folks have already said, leaving room for honesty, and leaving room for the disruption of God, the disruption of the Holy Spirit. I think that is something that more and more people are actually looking for. And I think people can tell when we are trying to control things so tightly to prevent that disruption from happening. 'Cause this whole story is about that very thing. So yeah.
I was thinking about Altagracia, you had talked, I think, in the beginning about the everydayness. And I'm kind of feeling like, how do we get that everydayness so folks could relate to this story? And I think thinking about like the chaos of being a mom or being a family or, all of those things. And then sort of what does that look like? And the one idea I thought of was like, what if we told the story is vague enough so that you could be like, this could be Mary's story, but this could also be someone's story right now. Like she was worried about what would be happening, or she was worried about blah, 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 blah. Then, then there was, this thing that ran in and disrupted everything. And, blah, blah, and then like, is this Mary's story or is this your story? And then kind of go into whatever the point of the sermon would be, I guess. Those are my two ideas.
I like that.
They're actually really your idea. But anyway.
That's how we're creative. We take each other's ideas and let them percolate.
Share it and make it our own.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being guests on the podcast. I appreciate hearing your wisdom and stories and perspectives, and so do our guests. Thank you so much. If you want to learn more about Beloved Community, visit episcopalchurch.org/beloved-community. Thanks to our guests, Christina, Altagracia, and Aaron. Thanks also to our production team, especially Chris, Michael, and Olivia. If you found good news of great joy today, please rate, review, and of course, share our podcast. That's all for this season of Prophetic Voices, but join us in 2026 for our Ash Wednesday and Holy Week season. Until next time, let your light shine.